Welcome to the Great Beer State podcast from the Michigan Brewers Guild. The Great Beer State is a weekly show sharing conversations and stories from the passionate people who contribute to our vibrant Michigan beer community. It is made up of a mix between full-length archived interviews from the Guild's first documentary book project, A Rising Tide, Stories from the Michigan Brewers Guild, and conversations recorded in the here and now. Each episode is kicked off with a conversational update from host Scott Graham, Executive Director of the Guild, and the Brewangelist Fred Biltman, author of A Rising Tide. Here's Scott and Fred. Welcome to Michigan's Great Beer State. We are in episode 28 of this wonderful podcast featuring the people of Michigan Brewers Guild. My name's Fred. I'm here with Scott Graham. Welcome to the episode, Scott.
28, Fred. Thanks, and welcome to you.
Thank you very much. So we're going to do our standard updates here, getting started, and then we're going to introduce an interview from the archives from the Rising Tide project. We haven't talked about that in a little while. Rising Tide was a book we put out in January of 2019, which illustrated the story of the Michigan Brewers Guild through interviews and perspectives from about 35 of the people that make up of our community. And so we've got an interview from that project that we'll share with John Svoboda. And what else is going on around our Great Beer State?
Well, we're getting on to winter time with some crazy weather fluctuations, from snow to 50 or 60 or 70 to snow again. But anyway, it's fall. We're seeing the COVID pandemic rear its ugly head fiercer than ever. Just this week, although the launch of these episodes is not exactly on the day, and somebody indeed may be watching it well after the fact, but we've gone back into no on-premise dining for restaurants, which is a huge concern in the industry. People can still do outdoor dining, but there are serious challenges being outdoors. I mean, I think you were noting that today might be 65 degrees where you are, but it's windy. Outdoors has some real limitations. So again, not to focus on doom and gloom, I'd rather focus on more positive things. But this is a real hardship for bars and restaurants that sell Michigan beer, and certainly for our members, almost every one of which has some hospitality element, tasting room or full-blown restaurant or something in between. So it's we're back into grave concern, not that we were completely out of it, but that's noteworthy this week.
Yes, it is. And there's also, it seems like there's been some interesting conversation about what constitutes outdoor seating, and that definition is getting tighter and sort of more defined by the state, which is, I think, has intentions for health and safety, but is also eliminating some spaces that were considered outdoors before. You could speak to that at all, or maybe even send people where to go for that.
Well, I sure can, and you can check. Some great sources are either go to michigan.gov/coronavirus and there are updates there, and the Liquor Control Commission is continuing to update information, a lot of which is on their frequently asked questions button on their website, and they've been quite helpful in providing information. We right away got questions about outside, and is my tent okay, or are these igloo structures have come into play more, and there were a lot of questions around that. And again, it's one of those things, you want clarification, but do you really want the answer? And the answer was kind of interesting when it did come back, in that a tent with a roof on one side is outside. If you put down a second or more sides on your tent, you're now considered inside, which basically renders a tent not too practical. Even if you have some kind of heat going on in there, it's hard to keep it in there with one side down. But igloo structures are deemed okay as long as it's only people from one family in there. I'm relating the news. I'm not going to try and explain the differences.
Yeah, yeah, because the difference between an igloo and a tent one would be hard pressed to do that from scratch if you don't know why they're making them different. That's true.
Yeah, and bottom line is there's lots of frustration, there's lots of concern, not only for a brewery owner, but all of our friends in the hospitality business. If you're a server that doesn't know where your money's coming from, these people have families and homes and all kinds of responsibilities, and it would be yeah, it's hard to imagine the stress. We've got Thanksgiving coming up, and I'm thankful that I personally am not going through that stress, but I feel for people who are.
Yeah. So, it's unbelievable, I think. It's just unprecedented, and we've all acclimated to a certain amount where this starts to feel like just what we're dealing with, and we don't have that fresh reality. But I think this regression back to an earlier stage, for me personally, woke up that surreal nature of like, it's just unbelievable that the mere act of going indoors at a brewery or a restaurant or whatever is currently not allowed. I don't think any of us could have fathomed this. And that's repetitive, but it is the reality or surreality of where we are. So just wishing luck to everybody to hang on. And again, wishing consumers to consider our industry, consider our members, consider your neighbors, and what breweries and restaurants have put into the community all these years, and do your best to support them, both with your attitude and your dollars. I think that's all we can
Yeah,
hope
I will
for at this
second
point.
that as it makes sense. Breweries are doing different things, whether it's some level of takeout or creative takeout. Some places are doing scheduled days of growler fills. So it's much appreciated. Any support anybody can get on a local level, it will help somebody be there, hopefully, in a few months down the road. We've also had announcements of vaccines, which isn't going to be an immediate fix, but I think that that's part of the answer to the long-term solution of the disease slowing and people feeling more comfortable and us returning back to a more normal situation.
Absolutely, that was the first sliver of optimism in this, on the sort of virus level of things versus the human response to it. Or I guess it is the human response to it, but hearing about that has been certainly encouraging, even if it's going to be a bit of a haul to get to it. So I guess we can move on to happier things, which would be given our Brewers Dozen shout outs for the week. We're continuing our second lap around our member roles. And this one is a regional shout out to the breweries in the Kalamazoo area. You want to kick us off?
Yeah, let's start with one of our most prominent and oldest breweries, Bell's Brewery, the Eccentric Cafe and the General Store, which have been in Kalamazoo at that location for many years, and it's still a great place to go.
Absolutely. And not too far down the street, we've got Old Peninsula Brew Pub and Restaurant. Not quite the same age as Bell's, but certainly a long-standing member.
Yeah, they've been around for quite some time, and these are all in the downtown area. Saugatuck Brewing Company, Kalamazoo, formerly Gonzo's Big Dog Brewery, is right there downtown.
Yeah, and I think that this is an interesting thing for people to consider. This next one, if I'm guessing right, I think it's one of three of these types of breweries in the state: Kalamazoo Valley Community College Brewery. So it's an educational program teaching brewing and operating a brew pub.
Yeah, and the brew pub has very limited hours, even during normal times. But you're correct. And wrapping up the downtown area, a little ways out of downtown, is Bright Eyes Brewing Company.
All right, and if you turn around and head to south and west of Kalamazoo, you've got Latitude 42 Brewing Company in Ashtamo, west.
Yeah, which of course is their second location. And that's west of Kalamazoo. If you go south and west of the downtown area, you can find Texas Corners Brewing Company.
And then south of downtown, you've got One Well Brewing Company.
If you go further south, you get to the town of Portage, and you have the Latitude 42 Brewing Company. I guess you could call it their mothership, but that's where their production facility is and their first restaurant location.
And you also have Presidential Brewing Company in Portage.
Yep, not far from Latitude 42. And then we'll wrap things up by heading east to Galesburg. And as Bell's grew, they opened their main brewery now, which is in Comstock Township, but it's a Galesburg address. So Bell's Brewery Comstock, I guess, is in Galesburg, near Galesburg.
And you have Gull Lake Distilling Company also in Galesburg. That wraps up our Brewers Dozen for episode 28. So give those breweries a visit, a shout out, pick up some beer and food to go, and have some fun in Kalamazoo. So that brings us to John Svoboda. So he was brewing at Grand Rapids Brewing Company when we met him and when he got involved with the guild. This is just, I love listening to these old, the conversations with people that have been around a while. The interview's only a couple years old, but I just really enjoyed walking back down memory lane with John. What was it like for you?
It was much the same. You know, John's been around and part of the community for a very long time, and I count him as a friend. He's a really likable, thoughtful, intelligent person. He's been a great part of the community. And yeah, it was parts of the backstory I really didn't have any idea of. I know the story of Grand Rapids Brewing Company being, I think the second brew pub license that there was, and I remember the original brewer there, and as they got going, and I knew that John had been there for a long time and had taken over at some point after Mark left, but I didn't know the backstory of him home brewing and saying, well, if they're going to be a brewery, I'm going to go get a job there, and working as a bartender part-time, and then literally working his way into the brewery, and then becoming the head brewer and taking it to, I guess, new heights.
Yeah, I enjoyed that too, and I didn't know that part of the story. In fact, I had no idea that. I mean, I just chuckled even at the Jose Babushka transition into Grand Rapids Brewing Company, and that, that's a way a lot of those brew pubs, a lot of the first brew pubs started and it makes sense in hindsight. But having been around then, but at an existing brewery at Bell's, I don't know, something about it, the brew pub transition, going through this project brought new insight to that, let's just say. And that if you're going to start a production brewery at that time, a microbrewer, you were probably starting from ground zero, from scratch. But the brew pubs had an opportunity to sort of transition an existing restaurant business. And John speaks to that a little bit. And this story speaks to that a little bit. And just interesting part of our history that we had these kind of two lanes of startup, two different sort of models of how you might start up in the brewing business once that license changed in 92, 93.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to note that they're still sort of fundamentally different businesses. They're kind of three different classes even. You got the brew pub, which is, a full-blown restaurant operation with a Class C license, so they can buy and sell other beer, wine, and spirits. And then you've got microbreweries, a lot of which are actually pub-type breweries. And then you got packaging, distributing breweries. So the brew pubs early on were, a big part of our membership, and they still are, I guess. But it wasn't that long ago. I think we were about 50-50 as far as member license types being in the brew pub category and in the brewery microbrewery category. And as a lot more breweries have opened, many more have opened as microbreweries, and many of them operate as a pub type brewery, really with their tasting room, restaurant, but not a full selection of alcohol unless they get licensed and make it themselves as a winemaker and small distiller.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, and this story bears that out. And I also think that John's conversation and his career really is a great illustration of what of a path for a brewer that is not necessarily doesn't necessarily have to be an entrepreneurial path of I'm going to start my own business. And a lot of times we're talking to the operators that started their business out and maybe started as a brewer, maybe they're still brewing, maybe they're not. But John's path has really been I'm a brewer, and he's made a lot of beer over probably 2 decades or more. And yet his story is just different. And I think that would be an inspiration for somebody who just wants to put on their boots and brew.
Yeah, I agree. And it makes me want to go have a beer.
Yeah. And there's lots of good stories here. And I think John is a natural collaborator. He served on the board of directors when I was on the board. I was. You might have been on. Were you on the same board when John and I were on it?
I don't think I was on there when during John's tenure. I think that was when I was off already.
Ah, gotcha. Well, anyways, I spent a couple years with him on the board. Really, always appreciate his attitude and sense of humor, and he's a great member of our community. And look forward to you listening to this interview with John Svoboda. We were upstairs at the Knickerbocker in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He is currently the brewer at B.O.B's Brewery in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we'll hand it over. Take it away. Here's John.
Cheers.
Hi, John.
Hi, Fred.
Cheers.
Cheers to you. Cheers. Thanks.
So we're telling stories,
Lovely.
sharing stories, telling lies. Tell me your origin story. When did you start brewing, and how did you come into this whole world?
Oh, brewing. Actually, making beer. I was going down to Kentucky or Tennessee, something like that, and we were a group of us. We were out bike racers, and we were down there training in the spring, trying to get some warmer weather. And this guy said he had a home brew, and I thought, what the hell is that? You home brew. I had no idea what it was. And he says, "Oh, I made it. It's beer." And I was a beer kind of guy at that time. I've been making my money since I was 18, and one way or another in the alcohol industry, bar backing or bartending or whatever. And I was drinking, the cool beer like Dortmund or whatever, imports. And then I had a glass of this stuff when we got there, and it was amazing. And I asked him how he did it or what he did. And he said, the Barrel Shop, Rockford, Michigan. Went there and bought the stuff as soon as I got back home, and the rest is pretty much history.
What year was that?
Oh, jeez. 90, 80, 87, 88, something like that, 89.
Awesome.
90. Right. I know I was.
Homebrewing in those years was around and had been legalized, but it wasn't super prevalent. I mean, even going to the homebrew supply shop had to feel kind of adventurous. And
well, I was fortunate that there was a small nucleus.
It's impressive that it was in Rockford. Really.
Yeah, it was, and it's obviously not there anymore. But I was fortunate that there was a small nucleus of kind of these counterculture hippie types or whatever, and they were the primetime brewers. And
right.
I just called there or whatever. I'm not even sure how I got it. And Bruce Brandt was the president or whatever at the time, and he wet nursed me through my first batch of beer over the phone, and it was just an extract thing or whatever, and it worked out. And just since then, I've been made a lot of home brew at that point, and then that evolved into my first gig at the Grand Rapids Brewing Company.
So tell me about that. How did Grand Rapids Brewing Company come to be, and how did you start brewing there?
Well, just I was bartending. I can't remember exactly where it was, but bartending, and bartenders, they talk. I heard there's going to be a brew pub opening. I says, no way, brew pub. We're not California. Are you crazy? There's one brewery in Michigan. It's Bell's, whatever. So that's not possible. But they said, no, it's going to be at Jose Babushka's. That's going to be turned into a brew pub. And I was a bartender at the time. And I went over and I said, hey, I heard a rumor. And they says, well, it's probably going to happen. And they needed a bartender. So I hooked up a job there, bartending part-time. And I was also doing part-time teaching at the time as well. And it just slowly evolved. They eventually turned it into a brew pub, and bang, that was it. So
they opened. Did they open as Grand Rapids Brewing Company prior to Brewing?
It was Jose Babushka's at the time, and then they closed it for a month or 6 weeks.
Oh, I see. So the same organization.
Yeah, same building. Right.
Converted one concept into another.
Correct.
And you started tending bar there in the old concept of Jose Babushka's.
Correct. Yeah.
And then you were the inaugural brewer?
No, not at all. I actually, his name was Mark Steele, and great guy. And he worked for our company, and he was a wine steward. So he had a huge background and a huge passion for liquor and alcohol and wine and things like that. So he seemed to be, from an artisan perspective, he seemed to be the logical choice. So they trained, actually, the friends at Bell's trained him as an apprentice or something to that effect. He didn't really do a Siebel thing or anything like that, maybe a weekend here or something like that.
He trained down at Bell's? I didn't know that.
Yeah. I mean, it was completely like just almost an apprenticeship or something like that. Huh. Yeah, I think you were probably there at the time. You were sure.
Yeah, most likely.
Yeah. And but he came up and started making the beer there proper, and we got, as you can imagine, annihilated, being the first brew pub anywhere within 100 miles, and not 100. It would have been between here and Bell's.
Yeah,
and
so 45.
Yeah,
miles,
and
maybe
we
6.
Destroyed, and they needed help just washing kegs and cleaning things out, and so I just worked my way in that way naturally. And I had been homebrewing at the time, so they knew I had interest in that. So
do you remember what year was it that they opened as a brewery?
It was November 1993.
Wow.
1993.
So that is very much on the edge of that transition from when the law changed that allowed breweries for pubs to exist and microbreweries to sell by the glass. They were ready to go.
Well, sort of.
Well,
sure. Already we were.
Well, I suppose converting an existing business is one of the ways they were able to do it, but that's right on the edge.
Yeah, it was serendipity, fortunate timing. It was lucky.
So tell me about getting invited to start washing kegs and eventually brew. What was that path like for you as a worker and home brewer?
Well, it was kind of it was for some reason it seemed there still was this huge disparity between a professional rig and a homebrew rig. And at that time, I really wasn't mashing, or really, I was doing partial mashes or whatever, but I really didn't get the concept in terms of a real brewing equipment until I started, working in there. And so it was kind of different in that regard, because all the grain and actually at that time we had bought it pre-milled and mixing it and learning all the types of things about brewing that weren't really part of extract brewing, because a lot of the work's already done for you, and in terms of analytic enzyme type, all that type of thing that goes in with that. So that was an eye opener. But my background was I loved it enough and liked it enough, and I had enough science in my background that it made sense to me. And it was just it was a lot of work, because we were turning over keg after barrel after barrel after barrel at the time, way beyond the expectations. We actually bought at the scale that we're at now, it sounds insignificant, but we bought a 14 barrel fermenter, another one, because we needed 14 barrel. I mean, that's that's not even a test fermenter for some of these places now, but at the time it was this massive thing.
Yeah. Well, it's bigger than the soup kettle in the kitchen,
Indeed it is, or the bathtub.
So I'm curious about, so 93, and was it within the first year you start kind of brewing?
Really, I was really more just when they needed me. Yeah, doing that stuff and just hauling spent grain out or whatever, washing kegs and I would think that maybe the first time that I was really probably about 3 years into it, maybe 2 or 3 years, because I was still part-time. I was teaching at that time, actually, high school, so it was a part-time job, and both part-time, so it was a little bit in the brewery, a little bit here. So I really wasn't there. I remember the assistant brewer, or whatever he called himself, he got another job, and another guy got his job, so I started to work a little bit more intimately with the equipment. And then I would say maybe 1996, 97, I was actually, John, do this or hop this or something like that.
Yeah. And so when you're talking about, I wanted to circle back to those, you were talking about the shift between extract brewing as a home brewer and all grain brewing and on a professional rig, and sort of I feel like the question I wanted to ask was, you were both learning a different method. Were you also learning the benefits of was your expectation of the flavor changing,
dramatically?
The reason why to go to all grain is one lesson, and then how to go to all grain is another lesson, right?
Yeah. Dramatically, and I think that probably one of the interests that drew me to home brewing in the beginning was I like to cook. And that's a passion that still continues to be a big passion of mine. I like to create things. I like to have a garden, do that type of thing. And originally I wanted to, I tried to grow grapes to make wine and whatever, and that was a nightmare. But I didn't really get the idea. To me, home brewing was really basically cooking. And I didn't understand the vulnerability, particularly temperature control and oxygen and all that type of things, the things that can destroy beer or certainly alter it in a direction that you don't want to go in. And so I thought my home brewers were pretty good. But then when I started to have, because my relationship...
The reveal happens.
Yeah, right. Because my relationship with really good beer, craft beer, I mean, the kind of beer that you and I have been involved in for a long, long time, was rarefied. And it was 90% of it was from Bell's. And that was okay. That's what beer's supposed to taste like. So I didn't really get that from my home brew. That was a different thing. And when my buddies loved it, we had I went crazy. I got these big wooden carts, cases, and I wrapped them up individual pieces of paper and like wine. It was my little wine cellar. I had like 40 cases of beer in the basement, labels on it, because sort of just come on into my beer cellar, wine cellar. And but it was rotten, shitty beer. There's no question about it. Yeah. But my friends liked it. I liked it, and it was cool. Yeah. But then moving into the brewing company and tasting a beer that has met a terminal gravity, that was fermented at the proper temperature, that the yeast was, correct amount of yeast was pitched, and all the things that make a quality craft beer wasn't really part of my regime at home at all.
So what was it like what was it like having your beers poured over the bar and customers responding to them? And I guess my question is tough to narrow it down, but I'm wondering what that initial feedback loop was. Now you're having your beers poured in a bar versus in your basement. And I'm imagining some of those primetime brewers were swinging by. There's only so many brewers in the state, and now you're one of them, and you kind of came up through their ranks.
Mm-hmm.
What was that first response like?
Well, from the prime time, they were great. They would come in quite a bit, and they wouldn't critique so much as they would just come in and enjoy the beer. And they were helpful in that they were very enthusiastic about it. And I don't recall any any negative information coming back from them. The only at that time, again, not only was it a new thing, a craft beer in Grand Rapids, but we were very vulnerable at that time. I shouldn't say vulnerable, but very. It was very easy to go to the newest bar in town because there weren't a lot of great places at that time. So we could have opened up a turtle museum that had a bar, and everyone would want to go to it because it's a new bar. And those people really weren't crafty people at all. They didn't, and there wasn't a lot of exposure to it. So it was a chaotic environment from just selling beer or selling any alcoholic beverage. It's just a nightmare of business.
Part of your audience wasn't there for the beer.
Exactly.
They were there because you were a new joint.
Exactly, and that's rough in any place, but when people really did seem that I've heard about this or this is the cool thing or whatever, and they were very positive about it. Almost, I really don't recall too much negativity at all or reluctance for that matter.
And over those years between Grand Rapids Brewing starting and you being there and then you coming into the brewing, at that point there were, relatively speaking, a lot of breweries opening across the state. We went from 3 to 30, from 30 to 60 and onwards and upwards. What part of that did you see in your periphery vision, and what was it like to experience the community of breweries changing like that for you? Well,
we made friends, but it took a little bit of time. I mean, founders had come in. There was another a couple other brewers at the time too. There was Arena. You guys had come in on the lake, and we were all pretty good friends. And the turning point, I think, that the community was the inception of the Michigan Brewers Guild. Prior to that, my inroads to other places were few, but I tried to get. I didn't really spend a lot of time driving around and trying to find brew pubs or trying new things.
Imagine you're busy making beer.
Right? Yeah. I try to shoot out and get to as many as I can. I rarely made it to the other side of the state, but the Brewers Guild changed that forever when that started.
Awesome. Tell me about your first guild awareness or experience.
It was really kind of funny. I was the official assistant brewer at the time. Mark had left, and a new guy came in that was his assistant brewer that I was training with too, and he was all about it. And he was, we got to go to this meeting, and it's the Brewers Guild. And we're going to meet in this place in, I think it was it Jackson? It wasn't Jackson. Saginaw. And we went to this place, and there's Rex Halfpenny. You guys were there, and okay, let's. What we're here for is we need to make get a group of people together and concentrate on what we're doing and try to build this. And I just remember it was funny because at that time, I don't remember, maybe 30, 35 breweries total in the entire state. And we were parked, we were at this bar. What was the name of the place again?
Hamilton Street Pub.
Hamilton Street Pub. And we were sitting there, I remember, and this Budweiser truck pulled up. And I think it was Matt Allen that said, "It's a hit," some mafia thing. They're going to get us all right now, busted a right? Get every damn one of us. Either that or maybe it was Johnny Leonardo's that said it. It had to have been Leonardo's. Just right out of the blue, it's a hit. And it was kind of frightening too because it was kind of a dank day and it was cold and it was certainly right out of a Scorsese backdrop. But fortunately, that didn't happen. That was from that point on. We said, yeah, we have to do this, and we formalized it. 2 months later at Michigan Brewing Company, or however long it was when we voted. So let's do this. And
that was it. That was at Michigan Brewing.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, it was. It was a couple months later, 3 months later.
Yeah.
And that was, and then, phone calls and friendships and just meetings, and then it just took off. And
what was it like for you? Like, I remember, I think it's still this way to a certain point, in that for the microbreweries that were distributing, it was typically an owner-operator that was in the guild meetings that were leading their company, because their company's primary purpose was beer and brewing. And then for the brew pubs, which were kind of an extension of a restaurant model, which is saying, hey, we're going to let restaurants make their own beer. And it's a broad generalization, but that's also the model that your organization took. It wasn't necessarily the owner-operators. We're going to send our brewer, and it was a little bit more like an industry trade group for the maker. And so I'm just remarking on that, in that you're an assistant brewer, you've been in the company, but now you're sent to kind of represent the company's interests. That had to be a certain sort of adventure. And how did you relay back what was going on when you come back? I'm assuming that there was a little bit. So tell us what that was about.
It was remarkably at my advantage, our advantage at the time, because the guys, and they had the nuts to just say we're gonna have a brew pub, and went through everything to spend the money, get the capital, and let's build this thing. But their interest directly in beer, they leave that to these guys, and so it was completely without any responsibilities in terms of them. Okay, we want to know this, or they had no agenda. We needed to try to tell them what was going on, and they were completely open-ended about it. Sure, sounds really good. In terms of telling it wasn't, trying to the product, and again with the alignment with breweries, we didn't have to the distribution like that wasn't obviously part of our model, but we did recognize, and they did recognize, the value of camaraderie and getting the name out and projecting yourselves, even though we're not going to have a label in Myers or whatever, like anything like that, or we're not going to have presence in other breweries or other bars. Pardon me. They did recognize the value in the marketing and the fellowship that you could transcend through being part of the guild. So they were 100% behind it.
Awesome. And then as a home brewer and as a beginning professional brewer, I got to believe originally your opportunities to learn, your resources for education were, you needed to have a certain amount of ingenuity to find your resources, to find mentoring. Did your worldview, did your opportunity to learn change once you met all these other breweries, and once did that change sort of what your horizon line looked like in terms of learning as a craftsperson?
Well, completely, because the brewery that I inherited, the base, the knowledge base, was fairly rudimentary. I mean, Mark was a great guy. He was full of love and full of passion for what he did, but he didn't have a great deal. He just cut his teeth. Basically, just this is how you do it. And so it was learning through mistakes and learning just through doing the process. And so there were a few gaps in his education, and I certainly had, there were more than enough in mine. And another reason why the Michigan Brewers Guild was so beneficial to me is I'm not afraid to ask questions. I still do it to this day. As a matter of fact, I call people all the time because I'm confused about what's happening now, because I still don't understand this damn industry. But it's
keep at it.
Yeah, right.
Another 20 years you'll have it.
Yeah, right. Well, again, I'm not naive enough to think that I have all the answers. I certainly don't. And the creativity and the marksmanship, if you will, of some of these kids out there, it's staggering. But back to what it was calling people, and we had the foundation because the Brewers Guild, we're all friends, and that was a remarkable thing about it, because there was no even a remote scent of competition at that point. And maybe there was at such and such distributorship or things like that. I wasn't part of that, and I've been fortunate that I've not have to deal with that. But I mean, John Mallett, You know, I mean, people at Anheuser-Busch call Mallet for when they have questions. So, and he would talk to this, whoever the hell, it would completely please and just avail myself to me. And whatever he wanted, he would spend time with me. Across the board, I got those types of responses. And like Alan and these guys that were SIBO guys, or Scotty Graham, that knew, that had a core behind them that wasn't just based on, I was busting tables, now I'm making beer. Nothing wrong with that, but I mean, they really did have substantial experience and real world.
Technical, scientific direction.
Mm-hmm. And so that was, if I'm anything, I'm a product of the people I grew up with in this industry, certainly.
And do you feel that shifted from the years you were coming up to once the guild? I mean, I think you already said it, but I hear you talking about what became, and I'm just wondering, there's a handful of people that were making beer prior to that existing as an organization. So I'm just wondering if you really felt that gear shift in terms of, holy shit, there's people I can ask things. Do you remember when there wasn't? Or meaning, here's a better way to ask it. Is the guild a reflection of the community ethos that was already there? Or did the guild really help develop another way of thinking?
I never felt that I was alone in the industry, because it was, asking a question was paramount to me. I mean, I knew that was, if I have to find these answers, and I wasn't going to be able to find them in the literature anywhere. I suppose I could have, but I don't think I have that kind of scholarly approach to it. However, it was I think the people that became brewers, particularly and even obviously today it still happens, but that there is a certain personality quirk, trait, whatever. Or maybe it's just the advantage of being based on a little bit of an infant industry, if you will, not in terms of brewing overall. Obviously, that's primordial. But the craft beer industry, that wasn't based on what your dad's dad did, and it was more. It was, I think, we understood that we need to rely on each other and help each other to make this work. And not only that, but it just seemed to work. It just seemed to fit in naturally.
Yeah, I think that's sort of a pioneering nature, that when you're cutting a new path and you realize that, pardon the severity of the analogy, but if you feel like your life's at stake and you're carving a new path, anybody on that path with you becomes an ally, because you're both going to try to save each other's fucking necks.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think there's a certain amount of survival instinct about, oh, this is going to be hard. Mm-hmm. We should help each other out, and then that, I think, helped feed some of those early guild years as well.
Certainly, because it was if us helping you helping them, and it's eventually, we need to help promote everything, because each other and each other's products, because you're not going to get anywhere fast. Matter of fact, there's a couple of in the history of Michigan breweries that people have chosen to take the alternate route, and they're not around anymore. So perhaps they should have recognized their mistakes at that time.
Tell me more about that. What is that alternate path? What makes it up? How would you describe what that path is?
In terms of?
Well, what's the alternate path to what you're describing? What's an example? And it doesn't have to be named, or it could be named, but I'm just saying.
Well,
where are the pitfalls? Where are the trapdoors? What does it look like?
If companies, if a group is involved, I think in any industry, but I can't speak for all of them other than my experience in beer. When you approach this industry or our industry with tentative to be friendly or not taking advantage of the camaraderie and the fellowship that's behind it, and are apprehensive to embrace that, you won't succeed. And I have seen that happen, and more times than not. And perhaps an arrogance or an inability to understand that you need to really let people in, even though you might be apprehensive because you're overwhelmed by it or misunderstood it, something like that, I guess.
So organizations are people with an aversion to join, with an aversion to support the industry as a whole, kind of act as outsiders. It would be fair to say that they found themselves on the outside of the entire thing.
It's been my observation, and a couple of occasions that you can your analogy, you can plow your own road, but we got to your own make your way through the forest, but we're making real good progress here. Don't try to go left or right, and not to say that we had all the answers. We certainly didn't, but it doesn't take long to get a bad word out. And a bad word is fatal. And I'm not talking about a bad batch of beer. I'm not talking about a slip up or a script or something like that. I'm talking about just a bad attitude.
You're talking about industry reputation and credibility, right?
Exactly.
The other stuff, bad beer, bad experience. We're talking about consumers.
Sure.
But I think what you're alluding to is we've seen companies come in and make it clear that they're out for themselves, and so pretty soon they're by themselves. Self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. And that name, once that reputation spreads, I don't know. I don't want to imply that it's blackballing or anything untoward, but I'm just paraphrasing what you're saying. That that's what you mean by a bad name, is sort of the word on the street is. That you're difficult or that you're combative.
You just don't get it,
Then you make your bed, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's if the only thing that, well, there's lots of things to pay into it, but customer satisfaction, which basically you could probably distill that down to friendship, is what makes it all work. If you don't have that, then you really need to do something else. And it's just the joy in the heart that you get from making people happy. Not everyone can do that. I mean, there are industries that really don't lend themselves to that. But even in some isolated industries, you still need to make people as happy as you can. And we're fortunate in this industry that it's a fun thing to sell, I mean, cupcakes and cakes and beer, puppies, they're better to sell than, the cemetery plots or coupons on crematorium or something like that. So it's either way. But at the end of the day, that person.
I think that's quite an invitation, John. Like you said, you weren't scholarly, and here you came up with the phrase "making beer is better than selling cemetery plots."
There we go.
That is an invitation right there.
Let's hope.
Tell me briefly. So you have a long career in brewing in Michigan, but you are at your second brewery, if I'm not mistaken. That's how that went. Mm-hmm. So whatever's relevant, tell me about your shift and maybe as it relates to being a active member. You were on the board of the Brewers Guild. You've participated. You joined in. How did that end up relaying to you carving a new path and moving to Bob's Brewery, where you are now?
Well, I guess how the guild helped me. It certainly gave me confidence as a brewer because I made a lot of connections. I made a lot of good lasting friendships. Very valuable to me. And perhaps when I interviewed for the job, that came across as this guy's, this is kind of a good thing or whatever. They saw that as a positive perspective, a positive thing about me. Hey, he was in the Brewers Guild. He gets around. That's certainly. I mean, they didn't relate that to me, other than when they said, "John, please come down and make beer for us." So I guess that was affirmed at that point. But it certainly helped me personally having the connections that I have had and have, and the confidence to I knew a little, And so, and the rest of the fill in the blanks could probably come the same way they always have, from just relying on some of my relationships. But certainly, having the guild as a part of my personal background was an endorsement for me to get this job. I think, because I was kind of called out of the blue. John, can you? I had talked to these guys a year prior to, and then out of the blue, I got a phone call. Hey, come on down. You want to make? Can we talk? And I said, sure.
And were you in or out of Brewing at the time?
I was in Brewing at the time.
Oh, gotcha. Mm-hmm. So you left Grand Rapids.
Yeah, I left Grand Rapids. Yeah, gave him about a month or something, and my assistant brewer took over there. So yeah. Seamless transition, which was really good, because I feel loyalty. I mean, my floorboards are my heart's nailed to the floorboards of this industry in general, but I know the brew pub model much better than the distributive model, and I'm happy for that. And yet my loyalty is to Michigan brewing in general. That's I think that's helped.
And specific to brew pubs, well, it doesn't matter whether it's state specific or not. What do you think is the invitation or the call to action for breweries as organizations, or young brewers that are coming into the business at a very different time than when you came into it? What would be your words of encouragement to them as a business person and or as a guild member?
Well, I ask myself that from time to time. And I know that my crystal ball has been fractured and shattered, and it certainly hasn't worked, because I'm looking across the street, can't quite see it. There it is, Jolly Pumpkin. I remember when a good friend of mine came up with the concept of Jolly Pumpkin. We were talking about it, and I thought he was out of his mind. Are you crazy? A niche within a niche? Ron, don't do this. Gold medals later and several restaurants and thousands of barrels of beer. I guess I was wrong about that. I think we could talk a little bit about saturation points and, the competition that exists, and, for shelf space in retail. But ultimately, this industry changes daily in terms of what's new and what direction we're going in, and the portfolio of beers. At one time I thought, there were only 40 kind of beers you could make, right? There weren't any more than that. You can make a lighter brown beer, whatever. You can make. There's a book of AHA, and that was it. Now it's volumes and volumes. But customer satisfaction, guest satisfaction, making them happy, trying creative things. Avant-garde, odd things, the gozes, all these different types of things, the sours. It seems to be an endless supply of new things to do. And that can be overwhelming, and particularly for me. And I just, it's like, what do I have to do now? Wow, I have to think up something else. And again, but fall back on, just look, call friends or look in the Brewers Guild news or something like that, see what they're doing and steal somebody else's, or make an adaptation your own from somebody else's ideas. It's just, there is an awful lot of opportunity left in brewing, provided you're willing to find what you want to do and determine what sounds interesting to you and follow through with it. And I think you'll be successful if you do that.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. Thanks for all you've given to the community.
Oh, it was
wouldn't be the same without you.
I've taken a lot more out than I've given back. I like to think this industry has been quite a gift for me, and I'm very fortunate to have it. Part of my background.
Likewise, man.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening and sharing while supporting Michigan breweries and craft beer everywhere. The Michigan Brewers Guild was formed in 1997, with its first summer beer festival taking place in July of 1998. Its now 5 annual festivals are dedicated exclusively to Michigan beer brewed by more than 270 member breweries. The Michigan Brewers Guild exists to promote and protect the passionate Michigan beer industry in every way possible. To learn more, visit us at mibeer.com. or say hello on one of our social media pages, as we love hearing from you. From coast to coast, from far and near, let's drink Michigan beer.
Let's drink Michigan Michigan